Pleasure.
All right, well, let's dive right in because everybody's kind of excited to, hear from Jonathan, who of course founded, MeUndies about a decade ago. And the whole panel session is called How to Raise Capital, at least your first round, without screwing yourself over. So let's dive right in, Jonathan. And let's hear about the advice that you'd want to give other founders about what you would suggest that they not do.
Yeah, I mean, look, when we raised 10 years ago, it was a really exciting time, especially in direct to consumer and subscription commerce. There were a lot of companies raising money at the time at very, very high valuations. I think some of our competitors were raising at nearly 10x revenue that they were doing. And I feel like at the time, looking back now, it was very daunting in not realizing why we weren't getting the same valuations, why they were able to raise at such lofty, frothy valuations. And it was a blessing in disguise, I think, in the long run when I look back, because a lot of those companies are not around anymore. And the pressure and stress I've realized through now investing and looking at startups and in LA and seeing what kind of excites me to invest in. I've realized there's a little bit of a playbook, and this doesn't necessarily apply for everyone, but I think there is a tendency that I see in a lot of these companies to kind of follow the same suit, which gets them to a really tricky place down the line, where you don't have as much optionality, and you put so much pressure on yourself and the organization that you're kind of in a rock and a hard place. I've always found that, especially early on, it's the time where you're making the most mistakes. And so one way of kind of de-risking things is to actually kind of take your time, not raise, kind of figure it out on your own, maybe the first 6 months to a year, until you've got kind of a little bit of a proof in concept, and you've kind of proven that you've been able to kind of maintain some kind of financial stability, and then go out and raise money. Again, like we'll go a little bit deeper in this for sure about your Series A and your friends and family, but that's generally how I've kind of thought about this, and looking again at like a lot of companies in LA and startups raising capital. I've advised a handful of companies in LA. I've given them all the same advice to be very, very prudent upfront on your friends and family around.
So I think that's actually a good tie-in with respect to your fiscal prudence, given everything that's going on, right? The pandemic that obviously nobody predicted was going to happen. So can you tell us how some of the, your own advice that you've been following and lend to others that you support on various boards around various LA companies, so that people can get a sense of how you've been able to endure COVID? Has any of this advice come through?
Yeah, COVID's been very interesting. I mean, we started the year off a little bit softer than we liked. I don't know if that was because Q4 was such a big quarter for us, but Q1 started off a little bit softer than we liked, and it was very counter to how we started the year before. So there was a little worry already to kind of get the year started. And then when we started to see the early signs, we had team members that were traveling. We source our product overseas, and so we have teams that are constantly traveling. We started to kind of pick up on what was happening in our manufacturing facilities in Asia and Southeast Asia. And, we started to kind of see that this may start making its way over to the US. I would say the thing that we probably did best during the pandemic was work really well as a team. It was a time where I really saw our team come very close together. I tried to remain really calm and resilient. It's not easy. At times in the past, I've definitely been one who, during tough times can sometimes bottom down and start micromanaging and start really stressing out the team. But the year before, I saw it as a marathon, and I really see our business as a long-term play. And so although the pandemic was extremely stressful at the onset, we really kind of used it as an opportunity to like regroup and figure out what our strengths were as a team and as a company. And we actually kind of got out, so far, we've been doing really, really well. It's been kind of remarkable to see how we've hired people. We hired a C-level exec, our chief merchandising officer and our chief marketing officer both kind of joined right around the same time. And so to onboard two really crucial hires also and get them integrated within your team, when you're not physically meeting with people, and you've built kind of an internal culture that's very important to your day-to-day, that was very difficult. You know, and like any business, there's a lot of it's relationship based, right? And so managing the relationships and helping people create those bonds and working through things was kind of where I saw myself kind of play best. Like, don't worry about the numbers, let the team kind of figure that part out, but make sure that they're very connected and they feel like they're going to support each other in the same way you're supporting them. And I kind of enjoyed that. It was a different role than I've played in the past. And it felt kind of good to make sure that everyone felt, whether they were going through something personally at home with COVID, or they had a family member affected, like in any organization, you can only imagine with everything that was going on, there was a lot of internal things that were happening outside just the workplace that contributed. So I felt like it was a really impressive time for our company to kind of come together and figure it out and work through the problems.
And MeUndies is also renowned for its creativity. And we're going to come back to that in just one second, because on the topic of being creative, MeUndies has organized a contest. So people that submitted their designs to win the most creative brief contest are now up for voting. So we'll ask the administrators at eCom LA to post that link in the chat box and people can start to vote. Is that coming up? There you go. So the finalists are coming up. They've got creative names, creative designs. So everybody make sure you please vote now. And if you join in a little bit later, we're going to have one more chance to vote before the end of the session. So Jonathan, back to the whole creativity. I mean, the concept itself, innovative behind MeUndies. You created a market, you know, elevating the whole underwear shopping experience. And you were also wanted to empower people with, you know, authentic self-expression. So can you talk to us about this whole creativity that you've applied? I mean, even creating a subscription model, and tell us about how that helped you fundraise and get a higher valuation.
It did and it didn't. I think at certain times it helped because subcommerce was very trendy and it was something that a lot of investors were excited about. But then also there was a lot of subcommerce failures. And so that also hurt us because we were seen as almost like another monthly box company. And, you know, how many of these companies are there going to be? But I think what really kind of pulled us through was something you touched on earlier, which is what we started to really stand for as a company wasn't just cute underwear and trying to chase Instagram likes. We made a really unpopular decision, I would say probably midway through starting the company, where, you know, we wanted to stand for our customers, but we wanted to do it in an authentic way. And I was personally struggling with how we were telling our story. It didn't seem like it really was resonating with people. And there were different bits and pieces to the story that we were really using to kind of to tell our customers how we came about and why we're here. And it was really when I kind of was able to be the most vulnerable with myself and tell the story that resonated with me the most, that I feel like it ended up clicking with our customers because people saw the authenticity behind it. And it really is, in essence, I mean, I grew up always kind of struggling with self-confidence, and I grew up an immigrant family, and they were extremely, extremely hard on us growing up, me and my sisters. We kind of felt like we were in a world growing up in LA, but, you know, in another world because, you know, I had Persian Middle Eastern parents that kind of thought a lot of the things that they were seeing around them were crazy. So, you know, it was very tough. And, you know, I also didn't grow up kind of with all the pop culture cues that like a lot of the kids in school were used to, and so I always kind of felt like picked on or made fun of, and that didn't really help build my self-confidence. So when we started MeUndies and we really wanted to stand up for that person, like give them the confidence, give you a product that didn't alienate you, because all the other brands out there did that. Like whether it was Calvin Klein or Victoria's Secret, they didn't make you feel more comfortable within your own skin. They made you feel more alienated because you didn't fit within that box. You didn't have the six pack. You didn't have the angel wings, right? And so for me, when I was able to finally tell that story to our consumer, it clicked really quickly. And I think the creativity really came more or less from our team and our customers kind of buying into that and helping us kind of continue that. So a lot of our images, a lot of our creative come directly from our customers that we shoot in our campaigns, or that during COVID have been submitting, photos from home with their significant others, and really kind
and
of
their dogs.
I'm sorry.
And their dogs, right?
And dogs, yeah. we launched, I had my first dog 4.5 years ago, and I fell in love with my dog, and our brand's a brand that you want to share with other people, and we launched a product called the Buddy Band, where now you can match with your dog as well. So my golden retriever and I match underwear sometimes when we want to be a little bit more playful. But yeah, it's a fun, irreverent brand, and we don't want to take ourselves too seriously. But there's also been very unpopular decisions. I remember when we made the decision to finally make this switch and start being a very inclusive brand years ago, whether it was the comments that we would receive from our own friends, team members that are no longer with us, or even customers. We alienated a lot of customers early on that ran away from the brand. But, when we ended up standing for something to a smaller group of people, it's when they started to evangelize the brand. And today, our number 2 customer acquisition channel is friends and family telling each other of our brand. And I truly think that's one of the reasons we're here today, because we haven't had to rely on paid media as much. We've had our customers do a lot of the evangelizing and getting the brand out there. So that's helped us be extremely efficient with the dollars we've raised and helped us to kind of grow this organically.
I also see a little bit of a dichotomy between, the authenticity and the, sort of self-confidence issues that you raised in growing the brand. And yet you've got this wonderful tongue-in-cheek, kind of vibe with the brand. Is that something that your investors, were against at first, or were they immediately supportive of it to have a voice that stood out in that underwear market? Can you tell us a little bit about that investor reaction?
Are you saying, do you mean like early on how it changed to where it is today and the reaction early on, or?
Yes, like if that ended up thwarting some of your additional efforts for the raises, or especially since you were starting to lose some of your customer base with that pivot?
No, because I think at that time we weren't really very reliant on having to raise our next capital round. And so the pressure wasn't on us. If you're doing massive rounds and you're burning through a lot of cash and you're having to hit these unrealistic goals to just do your next round, you can get yourself in a pretty tricky place. But I think we were lucky enough that we were pretty much within a couple of years break even or profitable. And so the pressure from investors wasn't really there. We were always very much in control of our destiny and our brand in that way. So I think we were very fortunate in that sense. But yeah, I mean, there were investors early on for sure that saw the brand we launched and the brand that we were creating. And I think we're more actually intrigued with the evolution and the growth from what was a couple young guys launching an underwear brand that was probably overtly sexual at first. And I think early on we were trying to chase like what American Apparel was doing and just try and get a lot of attention, to where today, it's as we have and as I have, like we've matured in a lot of ways, and so is our company. And I'm very proud of that evolution to where we are today. I think brands definitely evolve over the years, and some not for the good and some for the better, like ours. And I think a lot of that also has to do with like team members joining and you know, really kind of listening to your team first and foremost and your customers about what they want and what do they care about, right?
And I think that was like really the important message that I wanted you to relay to the audience, since they're here to learn about, you know, how not to screw yourself over with respect to capital. And you gave everyone that really critical message that once you get some of that financial independence and you are less beholden on investors, you get the opportunity to, you know, flex your creativity and your designs and your instincts a little bit more. And I think that that's an important distinction.
Yeah, I think it's important, but I mean, just to back up there, because I know this is kind of the major topic we wanted to talk about. You know, a lot of times, and I don't know how many people on the call today are thinking about raising their seed round or their friends and family round. You know, I started MeUndies while I was working at another company, and I got it pretty far along. It was a product. We were working on the website and the marketing. And I think that was very important because it's very hard, obviously, to start something to where you're having to raise. And then how are you also going to feed yourself and make sure you have money for rent and everything else you need? So I do think it's important when you're starting something off that you also don't have the pressure on yourself, whether you've saved enough from the previous company you're at. I have a lot of friends that are launching things right now, and like, that's the way they've done it. They actually like created a nest egg for 10 years working corporate, and then finally now are in a position where they've created the product, the website, and once they launch, they're able to go raise their capital. I get really worried when people try and go raise massive rounds early on, not knowing what their projections are going to be, which I've seen a lot of recently. So it's like they've got this valuation in mind. They haven't even set projections yet on what year one or year two is going to be like. And I find it extremely scary because the people you end up hurting the most are your friends and family if they're the first to invest. Because I've invested in companies where the friends and family round came in very excited to support a product and a person. And then a year or two later, which is normal, it's not abnormal. So I'm not even knocking these companies, but reality sinks. It's really hard. You may hit COVID, you may hit, you know, a good or bad market. And for whatever reason, you're not hitting the numbers you thought you were. And now where do you go? Because you just raised at an aggressive valuation up front. Now you're having to do your round because you've burned through cash. And it leaves you basically having to do what I see are people starting to do cap rounds. You know, well, they'll do a round on a note and cap it, thinking that they'll either hit the cap or worst case scenario, their seed investors won't get hurt. But far too often it's your friends and family that end up, you know, getting hurt. And then you put yourself in a position where you've created a lot less options for yourself. Now, the flip side of that, again, is someone who saved their own money or was able to kind of get something off the ground, created a product, didn't put unrealistic expectations on their model, launches, creates some traction, has some numbers under their belt, and then with that goes and raises on something that's fair. You're putting yourself in a way better position to be able to ride the waves going forward if something happens, and set yourself up for long-term success.
So it really is about traction, so that you're not only not screwing yourself over with respect to raises, but you're not screwing over your friends and family who were the first to invest in you, right? And getting a little bit of that can make all of the difference in future rounds.
Correct, yes.
So on the flip side of that problem, so, you know, coming in from it where you've just outlined you're not having enough revenues, enough traction in the marketplace. Well, the flip side, something you've also had to deal with, is the issue of scale. And a lot of founders say, oh, that's a problem, you know, I'd love to have. But few founders are actually prepared for it. Can you talk about the importance of scale and how that relates to investments?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very interesting question. So, I mean, with scale, obviously, I mean, every single part, I feel like there's a breaking point. So I feel like the early years are pretty fun because everyone's doing everything. And obviously there's companies that have way outpaced our growth in 1 year, 2 years. And I think the rules definitely apply differently to those organizations because they have to scale their teams very quickly, which I'm not a fan of. But with that said, like we hit 2-3 different points in our company where I felt like, it felt like impossible to kind of break that next growth phase. And it's all mostly surrounded by process, right? It's like you build a certain process internally, whether that's how you're launching products or your go-to-market strategy, or how your team is just operating, whether it's 5-10 people. But then when you start your revenue starts growing, your team sometimes falls behind. And so what I really realized is that you need to have your team in a better place than your organization. And in order to scale, I feel like without a lot of those growing pains that a lot of companies encounter, having a very, very buttoned up people operations and HR team, I find is like maybe the most critical parts of your company early on. A lot of people think it's, okay, I need the marketer who's going to bring me the customers or who's going to help me sell the product and sell. And that's definitely important. But I feel like if you have a good product at a good price point with a good brand, I've seen that happen very quickly for a lot of companies. So it's like, I've seen companies launch month 1 or 2, and they're already doing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. But they don't have the people operations, they don't have the team, and they haven't kind of built out the process. And what ends up happening is their growth starts to plateau very, very quickly because they haven't built out these other components to their organization, which are critical to keep them running. And then things start falling apart, or you have key team members leave because not everyone wants to come join a company that's just trying to chase revenue, right? They want to be bought into an idea that's way bigger than a founder, even though they're bought in with equity. Like, it's not for everyone, it's not just chasing revenue, right? So I felt like for us, again, when we were able to figure out the deeper why within the organization, when we were standing up for our customers, we were able to really attract people at MeUndies that cared on a way deeper level than before, when we were just trying to add subscribers. So I think the best advice there is obviously to like make sure your core values as an organization are there, that you're fully bought into it, and you truly believe that this is like your greater purpose. You have to really, because times do get tough, and it's when times get tough that you have to like remind yourself that you're doing this more than like if you miss this month's revenue number, right? And obviously like rolling with the punches, right? Like just like in real life, you're gonna have really upsetting things happen in an organization, whether that's an executive you grow a really close relationship with, and they're so critical to how this thing has grown, and you can't see how this thing will continue without them. But you will always build stronger. It's funny. It's like your own personal relationships, right? It's like you will always find that silver lining afterwards, like that you've learned so much from them, and then you'll be able to kind of figure out how to rebuild, whether with someone else or with a couple different people. It doesn't always have to happen the same. Like when we've had those changes internally at those pivotal points, we've sometimes used it to be like, well, maybe we should rebuild the organization this way versus building it to kind of accommodate for when that person was there. So it kind of lets you reset sometimes and think about the future in a different way.
I think it can also create a lot of challenges. I've seen it, in companies where, at those pivotal points, there's some of the leadership that's changing, and now you're already in a, fundraising round, or you've got some aggressive targets to meet, and then, those personnel changes happen. How do you, spin that back to your investors? Can you give our other founders here some advice on what to do in those cases?
With management shifts and just like communicating with investors, I mean, they're never easy, but I think if, some of these things, they obviously will come as a surprise. So, your job is to obviously try and not have those surprises, but then also to try and create some contingency plans, right? And just check in. I mean, I think it's trying to avoid those surprises, but when those surprises happening, obviously just being extremely transparent with your investors or board. Again, I've never been in a position where I felt the pressure from investors or a board because they've been pretty much all in the green from day one, right? They weren't coming in on a high valuation to where it took them years to get in the green. And so when something like that happens, yes, it's a little bump in the road, but they're not putting as much pressure on you and they're letting you kind of figure it out along the way. Versus you raise a massive round and it's from one of these huge venture capital companies. They're placing your C-level exec because they have recruiters that they hire for you. This is very common. And then that person leaves and then you're not hitting your numbers. It's a very different place to be at, correct? So I think it's like, what kind of pressure do you want to put on yourself and your organization as you're scaling? And you're very much in control of your destiny when you're raising these rounds on how you do it and the type of people you have at the table and what type of pressure are they going to put on you when these things do happen.
I also think that from a number of conversations I've had with other founders, they have the expectation that they're going to go through all of these different sort of milestone phases with the same team. But the reality is they're not, and not just differences, with respect to like opinions or are you behind it or the pivots, but just from the standpoint of the capability set. You talked about how when teams change and like that membership, that constitutes that team changes, you're probably going to need a different group of people and a different set of skills to scale your company than it did to actually get it to the point where you're in a position to even consider scale, correct?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's also one of the trickiest parts because you have, organization like ours, we had early team members that were there for 9 years. And some of them end up, you have to make the hard decision at times to move on from some of these legacy people who've helped grow your brand and get them to where they are. And they're such a part of your culture that the idea of them leaving scares a lot of people, especially the more junior people on your team, right? Because, one thing I've noticed is like when you hired a tenured executive, they've seen so much throughout their career that, one of their team members or one of their friends leaving the company or is let go, it impacts them on a different level to where if this is your first job out of college or your second, it could be a very emotional change to see someone that you've been working alongside get let go. You start all of a sudden questioning your own job. Am I going to get fired? What am I doing wrong? Right. So to create that safety in the organization is very important. Obviously, it's hard to communicate sometimes transparently with your team when you let someone go, why you let them go, why it was the right time. So finding the balance of like how much you can share with them so that there's no surprises. Also, I remember early on, we definitely made the decision of like when someone is let go at our company, there should be no surprise, right? Like they should have been given a warning. They should have had follow-up chats. Like there's obviously the rare case where you have to let someone go immediately. But we've been fortunate enough to where we haven't really had to deal with that. But, I think it's fair to always kind of give people the feedback along the way and give them a chance to kind of make the corrections. But once that's not happening, having the honest conversation that maybe it's time for both of us, potentially organization and you, to go on to the next thing.
And maybe let's focus a bit more on some of the comments you were making with respect to the junior employees who, they're not as old and sort of edgy as the rest of us that have been in and around companies for a long time and, been there, done that kind of approach to it. How do you manage them? Because that cultural shift could have significant impact on either your ability to continue to generate the revenues and have that, team operating in harmony, or it could potentially impact if you're trying to gear up for the next fundraising round. So can you give our audience a bit of advice on how to manage junior employees, specifically getting a little more into when you said balancing transparency? Like, what does that really mean, Jonathan? What do you do? How do you help them through it?
You have to communicate a ton. So, I mean, when you get to that scale too, you're mostly probably communicating with your execs or C-level, or your directors, whatever level you're at. And so your more junior team starts hearing from you less and less. And so in a lot of our surveys, what I'm hearing is that like, they just want to understand the why. Like, right? Like, you may know it, you may be very passionate about, a particular product or collab or, something you're working on, but your junior team, it doesn't trickle down to them as much. So really, like, how do you inspire them, although you're spending way less time with them? Because your execs can do so much, but at the end of the day, it's like they want to be inspired by the person that's leading the organization, right? And so finding ways, like during COVID, I started to do Friday. We have team meetings every other week. During COVID, I made it a point to do a Friday update every single week, giving shout outs to junior people I may not work with. So I push my execs to kind of let me know who on their team is really hustling this week. What did they do that's really special? And share the light with them a little bit, right? We celebrate all the time, and what ends up happening are like people pray, oh my God, you're doing so well, your company's crushing it, I'm being asked to come speak at something. Your more junior team's not being asked to come speak, right? But at the end of the day, they're really the ones that are executing. Like, they're the ones that should be getting the credit. It's easy to, I think, come up with ideas, and I think early on, yes, we're the ones that are kind of cranking through things and making it happen. But as you start growing your organization, it's really the more junior team that's actually executing for all your executives. So finding, I think, a way to also celebrate them and give them the spotlight. It's as easy as a Slack. We have a shout out channel we use. But I even found that wasn't being effective at times because, people would just check the Slack channel and like it and then move on, versus like, spending a little bit more time at the end of the week to like really kind of storytell a little bit about a person, what they did, how they contributed to our success this week. And when they're not expecting it, it makes their day, right? So I think it's continuing to find ways to kind of keep your team informed, and then also share the mistakes. Like, I think that's one thing that I found, that we're not perfect. Your team is going to be upset about decisions you make all the time. Once you get large enough, there's many different options and ways of doing things, whether that's a color choice or a print for us, or how we respond to a situation. There's going to be very unhappy people who don't necessarily believe that the decision you made was right, and especially more so now with what's going on in the world, right? You have COVID, you have the things that are going on socially, and so your lack of support can be seen as something, and then your support of something could also be seen as something. So just communicating, I feel like, along the way, letting them know where you're coming from, why you made this decision, and then also saying that we may have made the wrong decision, but we're willing to admit when we're wrong and get better. And we do a lot of surveying. So like, I feel like every week we're sending out an internal survey asking, our team how they feel about a particular thing or whatnot. And it's gotten great. There's great, our team has bought into that now. And, early on there was the amount of people that actually were filling out the surveys wasn't great. So you wouldn't get a good read. But then when you're actually following up in your team meetings, addressing the surveys, and they're seeing there's amazing follow through with what's going on, they're more motivated to kind of participate and share.
I think that closed loop in the communication is what you've just articulated is so critical. right? And then the transparency saying, yeah, this is what we heard. 67% of you didn't like whatever, unpopular decision of the week. So this is how we're reversing it or going forward. That's what people want to hear. I think that really keeps the team harmony. So when you look at some of the other investments that you're involved in and at the level of, I guess a board member and advisor and some of the other local companies, what's the part that you find that the founders struggle with the most? Where do they need the most help, it seems?
That's a great question. It definitely differs across the companies because some of them are a little bit further along than others. But I guess it's being able to realize what your own personal weakness is. So as a founder, especially if you're doing it without any other partners, I think it's recognizing what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses, and where my weaknesses are, how am I going to fill in the gap, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, early on, when I launched MeUndies, I actually wasn't the CEO. I came up with the idea, I put it together, I got it pretty far off the ground. And then one of my childhood best friends learned I was doing this, and he was more of a finance guy, and I wanted him to be the CEO because it wasn't where I had my confidence in the beginning of my career. And then I had to step in and do it, and I did it really well. And then there was another part of my career where I felt like I needed that help again. So I think it's recognizing what are your weaknesses and what are your strengths, and then how are you going to build for that versus being insecure about that, right? I think when I was starting, granted, I feel like I did the right thing. I brought on a partner. But I feel like a lot of people potentially don't do that. They try and do it all on their own, and they get to a place where they're struggling or they're hitting a wall and they're not realizing why. And it's because they haven't kind of tapped into these other people that they need help from. Asking for help is something that people don't necessarily like doing, or some people don't like doing. But I think it's important to recognize, again, where your strengths and weaknesses are, and being able to tap into other people, whether it's an advisor or bringing on a partner to help grow something. A lot of people see it as like, no, I don't want to give away a big part of my company to somebody else. Like, I want to own 100% of it. It's like, do you rather, I'm sure everyone's heard this, you rather own 100% of something small or a smaller portion of something huge, right? And people get stuck in that mindset. Same thing when they're raising their capital round. They're like, well, I want to go after this huge valuation because I need to raise all this money up front because I'm not going to have enough money. So it's like, well, maybe you should rethink that, right?
And you raise a good point. So appreciate, your vulnerability here where you said, yeah, finances really weren't your thing. So you brought your friend in to sort of lead that role initially and then move that around. Many of the surveys that go out, and sounds like you're a big survey guy too, that they ask the founders where they feel that they have the most gaps, right? Like, where are their blind spots? And many of them report that it's really around the financing. They don't understand the difference between, some of the equity growth, do they crowdfund and do a fundraise? What do they do as far as like preparing for, a Series A? Do they take, which paths do they take? And they also raise the point, not only the, I don't want to take out my big chunk, right, of my equity. I don't want to dilute that pie. I want to keep it as large as possible, even if I'm going to have a larger chunk of a smaller number because I can't let go, is the issue of trust that they're bringing in these external folks, often seeded by the venture capitalists themselves, or because they're forced to in order to prepare for a fundraising round, yet that trust isn't there and they don't understand the financial domain. So what advice do you give to those founders who are in that tricky situation?
I didn't know. It's funny, like early on, I remember being in meetings and they'd be like, well, what's your LT? I didn't even know the terminology. So it was extremely scary to be in these meetings. And I think it's normal. I feel like we were lucky also that we had extremely good counsel. So one thing I see early on are people who will use their friend as a lawyer. They may know someone who's a lawyer. Okay, he's going to do my startup docs. And we actually did that the first go around. We hired our friends lawyer to do our docs, and we set it up as an LLC. And then once we actually went to go fundraise, we had to redo everything from scratch. And and it was when we actually we hired, I'm really proud, we hired Cooley early on, and they've been a great partner for us because they've been there along the way to kind of help guide us through some of these things, because they represent the company first. They also want what's best for the organization. So I feel like having sound counsel is very important, and it's hard because early on you don't have the money, right? Like, really good lawyers are really expensive. So, organizations like Cooley are great because they'll sometimes front load, they'll give you credit, or they'll figure out ways. Like, don't be afraid to go after the best law firm, because if you really do have a great idea, if you will potentially have backers behind you, they're the first ones to believe in your concept at the startup phase. So if you have a concept and an idea, I would first go to an attorney in LA that I trust and almost pitch them. And if they're excited to potentially work with you, that's a good sign, because they're seeing so many companies come to them. It's a good sign. And especially if they're willing to front load their legal fees, that's also another good sign. That's like your first investor almost, right? So we were lucky enough when we were at DLA and then we went to Cooley, that a lot of the structure that we had to put in place when we were raising our round, even though I didn't know the terminology, they helped guide us and make sure that we were not shooting ourselves in the foot in the long run.
Now, people are usually tuning in for broadcasts like this so that they can get tips from somebody who, like yourself, has been successful and can share some of those things that they've done to, towards the goal of increasing their success. But people also like to tune in so that they can hear about other people's mistakes, right? Ideally, so that we don't repeat them. Now, that doesn't always happen. Many people do repeat the mistakes, even though we've heard them. But if you could go back and I gave you some pixie dust, Jonathan, and said, you get to change one thing, what would you change?
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a really good question. And it's a hard one to answer. I mean, if I were to go back and change one thing, I think I would I said this earlier, I would put a little bit more emphasis on setting the brand values and the direction a little bit early on. I think when we started, we had such an identity crisis because we were just looking around at the landscape. And today, even more so than ever, the landscape of direct-to-consumer underwear, it's insane. When we started, there was one website, I think, at the time, and it wasn't even a brand. It was selling other brands. But today, it's so easy to launch a brand and a product that there's endless options. And with endless options means your customer can go anywhere. And so that means that and this wasn't the case before. I mean, if you think about it, direct to consumer online purchasing and the way we see it today has taken off in the last 10 years. So when a consumer has endless options, they're going to hold you to your values. They're going to hold you to your brand. They want the brand and the product that they buy to resonate who they are. It's no longer the day and age where you go into Macy's, Walmart, or wherever. It means, yes, you can still go into these places and buy products, less so right now during COVID, but they're curating what you buy. You're buying based on potentially price or the branding element, but they're the curators. Today, we're very much in control, I think, of our purchasing on a level that I don't think we've ever seen in the last 100 years. So with that said, I feel like one thing I would go back and change is be extremely, extremely thoughtful from day one, what that brand stands for and what it means, and be crystal clear. We got lucky, we got there years later, and we did the work. It's way more painful to do it later than to do it early on. And when you do it early on, you have also the potential of bringing people on that want to join you to help you get to where you want to go, hopefully faster than we did.
Excellent. And talking about pain, I mean, with respect to successive rounds, the more that you go in, obviously, the smaller that your piece of pie gets as you're constantly diluting it, not just for yourselves, but for future investors. And I've heard some great advice for you in the past on this with respect to valuations and successive rounds. What would you like to talk to our audience about?
Yeah, so in regards to valuation, I just think, again, being realistic, you have VCs sometimes coming in trying to, especially if it's their second go around in your company, right? You have to also understand what's the venture capital's goal, right? The LPs that are investing in their rounds, that they want to show massive growth to so that they can go raise their next round. So sometimes they're incentivized to make it look like you're growing way faster than you actually are. So I've just always found that it's a threshold on yourself. Like, how confident are you in hitting your goal and your plan that you've shown your investors? If you're overly confident, then get aggressive with your valuation. I tell startups this all the time. Like, if you put a plan in front of me or in front of your investors and you think you're going to double or triple that plan, then let's push on the valuation because you're leaving money on the table. But if you don't want to put that pressure on yourself either, and you think that the plan you've laid out is a realistic, fair plan, then allow room for your investor to kind of grow into that number and for them to also make money, right? So I feel like somewhere in the 2.5, 3x range makes the most sense for a company that's growing at a healthy rate. But again, if you're growing by 2, 3, 400% or more, some companies are, then by all means, or if you've got some very special technology you've built, by all means, I feel like you could definitely press on the valuation. But then again, you have market conditions and other things that may come up that are totally out of your control that'll leave you in a really sticky place. So I think for me, I've invested in unicorns that today are worth over $1 billion, and I've seen them get into a really tricky place, having to do down rounds in today's economy. And then I've invested in companies that haven't really raised that much capital, raised their initial round, use that, and today are billion-dollar companies. So I think you can do it both ways. It's also the type of pressure you want to put on yourself. What's your appetite and how realistic do you think your goals are? I feel like, so if someone can help determine those things, it makes it much easier to kind of set the value and the number that makes sense for you.
Now, before we get to the audience questions, I want to have one more question for you, and then we'll turn things over to get some of the feedback there and questions that are coming in from the chat line. So obviously, we're in the midst of a global pandemic. The whole West Coast is pretty much raging fires. We've got storms spinning in the Atlantic. In fact, so many of them, we don't even have names for them anymore. I'd like to end this conversation on a message of hope, something inspirational, something entertaining. What would you like to tell the audience, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I think, with everything that's going on right now, I still do think it's a beautiful time to be, whether you're launching something or you're in the middle of something. Like, I was on a call earlier today with my team, and we're running through some difficulties. We're setting up a new warehouse, and it hasn't been easy. And I feel like it's indicative of the tension. A lot of people on our team people are stressed out right now, going through a lot. But I feel like it's also a time to build deeper connections with your team. Like, be very, very compassionate with your team, understand where they're coming from. And remember, we're all humans, right? Like people have good days and bad days. And I feel like we get so stuck in the routine of going into the office, having our back-to-back meetings, that sometimes we kind of it takes something like this to happen for us to all slow down a little bit and realize life's precious, right? That our health is very important to us, our well-being, and yeah, our teams are extremely important to us. So showing up for people on your team. I know we've had some sad stories of people passing within our organization, their families, and watching how our team has showed up for those people has been super inspiring to me. And so I feel like if there is, again, a silver lining here, that It's that, to be kind and thoughtful, and just remember that someone else is probably going through something as well. And you could show up for people. I've had team members show up for me in the last month that I never expected. I was personally going through something, and my assistant sent someone to my house, a shaman, and it was so funny. It was so random, but it was something as small as that. And, we've done things for each other in that way. So I feel like if we could just be a little bit more thoughtful and caring, we'll get through this and we'll come out of it much stronger.
Fantastic. Well, I've got a couple of questions from the audience, actually a number of questions, but I'm going to pick a couple of them. So one of the questions being asked is, how do you scale your brand identity with your business?
How do you scale your brand identity with your business? Well, our brand identity really, as I said earlier, came really out of the woodwork from our own customers. And so it kind of became easy as we were scaling the business and leveraging our own customers. It became very easy, but I don't know if there was a second part to that that they were looking for. I hope I answered that right.
Well, there's some other questions in and around there that I think maybe might add some more color to that question in case it didn't exactly answer what the audience member was posing. So one of the questions related to this on brand identity is how you're combating fast fashion, but still upholding your own brand identity.
Yeah, we make sure, again, as we're listening to our customers, we hear that, making sure that, I see ourselves almost as a fast fashion company. So, we put out a new product in print every single week. If that's not fast fashion, I don't know what really is. And I know it's not a very popular term today, but where we try and make sure we're combating that is making sure that the products we put out are of the best quality. They're sourced ethically. The fabrics we use are sustainable. The packaging, every year we try and go deeper and deeper on our stance. And so last year we weren't using recycled plastics. This year we are. So I feel like as you scale, you have a responsibility to try and do better. And we've been able to now give back to more meaningful causes than we have in the past, because before we didn't have the cash to do that. So, I think as you grow, you have to also make sure that there's the social responsibility that you're holding your company to. That's very important for the consumer too. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the customer today has endless options. And so if you're going to fall asleep, as you're growing, you're going to become one of those brands that was just focusing on profit.
And given that this whole session is themed, trying not to screw yourself over when it comes to raising capital, have you ever been screwed over or feel like you have? Or do you feel like someone tried, but you were able to outsmart them?
No, again, because we never raised those aggressive rounds or valuations, or we're in a position where we had to do our next round to keep the lights on. I think that's when you feel you get either put in a bad position or you have to end up doing something you don't want to. So we've been fortunate enough, again, because of the way we've raised, our emphasis on making sure we're driving profits, that we didn't feel like we were in a corner having to make a decision that wasn't best for our team or our investors.
Another question from the audience. Can you think of a time where you had to adapt quickly? You had something happened, some growing pains, you had to pivot, do something?
Yeah, maybe a shocker for this crowd, but I had to go to prison 2-3 years into starting the company. So something from the past, I was in real estate and we were doing construction on a building. We didn't know there was asbestos in it. Anyway, that's a whole another fireside chat for later.
Yep.
But I had to all of a sudden, after being 2.5, 3 years into launching MeUndies, moving into our first office, I had to step aside as the CEO and check into federal prison for 8 months. So that was extremely drastic. I had to find a CEO and a partner, put him in place. We didn't really have a board at the time, so we had to establish a board. And it was extremely stressful because our company was just taking off at the time. We were just scaling to nearly our first $1 million month. And we had hired a team member, one of our first hires, that was moving to California to come join us, and having to have the difficult conversation on getting on the phone with her to be like, hey, I still want you to join. I still want you to move here. But by the way, I have to leave for 7-8 months. So, you know, I think that was definitely a challenge that none of us expected. I didn't expect it ever would get there. But working through that, I think definitely taught me a lot, and it helped me also put things in perspective that, like, if we can get through that, if I can get through that, then, you know, we can get through anything.
So not the answer that I had expected when I've asked entrepreneurs before about their pivot stories. I haven't heard that one, and I'm sure I speak for the entire audience when I say that we really appreciate that level of vulnerability and honesty. That's indeed refreshing, and you can see, you know, where it's making a difference with respect to your brand and what you do. That's, you know, being told that you've got to report to federal prison is not just a matter of a simple pivot. That's life-changing in so many ways. That must have been horrendous, very hard.
It was, but I don't trade the experience for anything. There were some great relationships made, and, you know, we had some amazing stories that came out of that. You know, we had launched a national campaign that, you know, with Joseph Randall, that came out of the woodwork from there. So, no, I appreciate that. But I think, like, you have to kind of, again, with any obstacle you face, you have to kind of look at the positive and try and draw that out. Otherwise, it's going to crush you. And if you really want to, like, if you're going to raise money, especially from people, like, that's a commitment. When I was taking cash from people, that on that first day, you know, I made the commitment that I was not going to lose their money, and I was going to make sure that I made them money, because that's why they were investing in the company. So I took it very personal that, like, no matter what we went through, that they were going to kind of come out ahead. So I'm proud that, you know, today all our investors are extremely happy and have been extremely supportive as well.
You've talked a lot about relationships throughout this broadcast. And so it's not surprising that one of the questions from the audience is asking you to comment on the difference between having the right people versus having enough people on your team.
Yeah, it's better to have the right people. One of our back to your question earlier on, like, the growing pains, and, you know, there was definitely a period within our organization. We moved into the office we're in today. We had closed our Series B, which was the last round we had raised, and we went on a hiring spree. And we wanted to fill the seats in this beautiful new office, but we also needed people to scale. Like, there were roles that, you know, we definitely had to hire. And I think we put less emphasis on the culture, the people we were bringing in. They were all good people. I'm not saying anyone was bad, but one bad apple can truly destroy a company. And I think there were a couple people that just came in within the organization that didn't share the same values. I didn't think cared about the organization in the same way, and they set us back tremendously. So I would say I would rather be a smaller team and rely on people I trust and that you know are going to be additive to your culture and your organization, versus just trying to add people knowing that there could be some people that are going to set you back pretty far.
And one more quick question before we have you announce the winner of the Creative Briefs contest. And that question again comes from the audience. You know, we're in this era of, you know, yoga pants, you know, blazers on top, more comfy down below. So is MeUndies ushering in the era of comfy couture?
I don't know if we're ushering in comfy couture, but we're definitely believe that you should be comfortable, especially now more so than ever, where we're like working from home. We don't have like, I used to never be able to wear shorts to work, right? Like, and would kind of almost like think it was silly if someone else did. But I feel like we're in a totally different world now, where we want people to be comfortable in their own skin. Our brand is fun and irreverent. Like, we have fun prints that are coming out that you could share with your significant other. But yeah, we make the most comfortable loungewear, I feel like, and it's a perfect product to kind of lounge around the house in, whether it's a t-shirt that we make or modal hoodies. It's easy product, and I don't know if it's couture, but we do have more prints than any other underwear company in the world. We have fun collabs that are constantly coming out every week. So we love the newness that we bring, and our members love kind of sharing their product with their significant others or their pets. So we don't want to take ourselves too seriously and like to have fun.
No, and I loved your new The Office ones and that collaboration. So that's kind of fun. Now, I'm going to say thank you very much on behalf of the entire audience. You've been generous with your time and your authenticity, and I'll leave it to you to close this broadcast with announcement of the winner of the Creative Briefs contest.
I don't know if I have, Eric, do I have that or do you have that? Where are the results all coming in?
You have it in the bottom right. It just got messaged, yeah.
It did.
The chat.
Okay. So the winner is Where the Sun Don't Shine.
Yay.
Well done. MeUndies shopping spree.
Very exciting. No, I appreciate it. I don't do these too often. So when I do, I really like to put my all into it. Eric, Hawke is an amazing company. You've done an amazing job with it. I think you've built a true community in LA, and I'm proud to be a part of it and proud of what you guys are doing. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. No, we go way back. And yeah, thank you for the story and some of the, getting real with the past. We've been talking a lot, kind of during COVID about like, yeah, this is a big hit to businesses, but as business owners, as entrepreneurs, there's always something. And there's things you never would have expected from all sides that are going to hit you while building businesses. My partner and I started talking about a couple of years ago, we really realized like Apple, Tim Cook is dealing with monopoly and antitrust violations. He's dealing with trade wars with China. He's dealing with COVID as well. Like, there's no point running a business that you're not going to be dealing with shit. And so getting through a little bit of hazing, so to speak, and getting used to having that, it's important for every business owner to know.
Yeah, and I think building a community where you feel like, I feel like we had a very strong community when we were starting our companies. We were surrounded by a lot of great people that we can tap into when that happened. So feeling like you can tap into that or be a part of something's really important.
Yep, agreed.